Hi, everyone, and thanks again for joining us at Techno Day. And we have a very, very special episode today of Frontend Happy Hour. And we have some of the usual suspects who joined that podcast. So I'm gonna let them introduce themselves. Shall we start with you, Ryan?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you so much for having us. I'm Ryan Burgess. I'm a software engineering manager at Netflix. And thanks for introducing Front End Happy Hour, which is a podcast that the three of us are regular panelists on. And we talk about careers, engineering. I mean, all sorts of things. It's just been a lot of fun. We continue to do that even during quarantine, which has been fun.
That's
Shirley,
great.
you want to go next?
Yeah.
Yeah, hello. My name is Shirley Wu. I'm an independent creator of data visualizations, which just means I work with clients on in many different industries to help them tell visual stories with their data.
Nice.
And hi, everybody. I'm Stacey London. I'm a senior front-end engineer on Trello at Atlassian, and I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And so today we are actually discussing inclusion and diversity in tech, which is, I feel like it's a broad topic. So I'm really excited that we can probably cover a lot of fun things. But I figured to start with, I'd be curious to hear all of your thoughts. What makes an inclusive environment?
It's so many things, right? And I think it's probably different for each person, like what they think means, what inclusion means for them. But for me, it just sort of means that like my ideas are valued, I'm listened to, I'm not interrupted or talked over, I'm given space to speak. I can be myself. I have psychological safety on the team that I'm a part of, or even the broader company as a whole. I think also like a place where people who are, jerks are not tolerated. Like there's a culture where those kinds of people are not welcome because they're not kind and they're not welcoming, and they don't create that kind of environment where people want to work together. So I guess those are some of the big things that pop to my mind.
So I think for me, it's currently a little bit interesting because I work for myself. So I am a team of one. So I guess I'm both very inclusive and exclusive for myself. But if I think back to when I was at full-time jobs, I have to admit, this is, I guess, the confession, that I left full-time tech because it felt very, it felt not very inclusive. I'm one of those that exited out and I was like, I'm better off on my own. And that was like 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm starting to reconsider because I'm seeing more and more initiatives like this, more conversations like this, that's much more about being welcoming. And so I'm starting to reconsider looking into full-time jobs again. But I do remember when I was at a full-time job, the number one thing is that I have a lot of opinions. And so I think to echo what Stacey was saying, for me personally, it's about first being able to say my opinion and knowing that that's not going to get me punished in any sort of way. And then also valuing that a diversity of experiences usually make for a much better output of work.
I like that. Jen, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's basically kind of the same, right? Where you don't feel like you don't belong. I think basically it's that, right? Yeah, you need to feel like you belong, in this organization. And as to what she was saying that there's a lot of like initiatives now and conversations around diversity inclusion. I think it's getting better. Obviously, it's not jumping by like a large leap or something like that, but at least we know that there's some movement. At least it's not perfect, but the important thing for me is that people are actually doing something, not everyone's doing it, but I know that there are people or organizations who are consciously doing something to change, like the environment that they're putting like their employees into. So I think that's very important, because I always say, like, we know the problem, but and we keep on talking about the problem. For me, what's more important is what actions are we taking to actually address that problem. Because it's, yeah, I know it's nice to hear about, like all this talk about recognizing that there's this problem, blah blah blah, but I need like concrete actions. Definitely, that's what I'm always looking for.
Yeah, I think it's like, it's always great that we're talking about it and recognizing we can do better. And that's great. But it's like, if there's no action items or nothing's changing, that's kind of, it's upsetting that it's just like, okay, well, then what's the point? But I also think it's really nice is to recognize it takes time too. It's not going to just happen overnight, but it's like every little bit helps. And so people that are putting actions out there, or even just being a little more aware in how you approach situations, I think that to me is going a really long way. But it does take time. One of my favorite quotes, actually, I'm going to quote Vernee Myers, who's written the book. I'm trying to remember what if I say the wrong thing. She does a lot of great inclusion work, but she had said is like, diversity is is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And I always, that like always resonated me with like really well, where it just makes a ton of sense that it's like, cool, like we're asking people, looking for them to come, but if we don't make it an inclusive environment, who cares? Like they're like, especially when I think about companies, is like, if I hire someone like who, maybe different makeup than my team has, if it's not an inclusive environment, they're going to bounce. And then, so we don't benefit from them, and from their diverse opinions. So that's always one that's really resonated with me.
Totally. You see a lot of these companies put a lot of like money and effort into like recruiting and hiring, to make the makeup of their company more diverse, but then they're not doing the fundamental thing, which is really changing the inside culture to make sure that once you hire people that are, bring diversity into your company, that they also just want to stay because it does feel inclusive and that they belong. Like that's the huge thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it goes such a long way. And like, think that's to kind of a lot of your points of saying like, hey, I'm respected for my opinion. Like people are going to hear me out. They may not agree, and that's okay. Like we are all going to have varying opinions, and it's really about like, how do we think about those holistically and be challenging each other and doing that, especially when we're creating products, because that's what a lot of us were talking about, right? We're building applications, we're building websites, we're building things in which a diverse set of people are using. It's not just made for the single type of people. And so you want those different opinions and different walks of life for people coming and joining to help build a better product. And I think that's the ultimate goal too.
Yeah. And to your point about product, I think that it's, again, this is me like, from the outside looking in. I think it's such an interesting movement that's happening. That's that now diversity and inclusion is oftentimes very much connected to the bottom line, because to your point, we want products that serve the very diverse set of people that use these products. And so if they don't, then that product is going to get not like it's not going to get picked up, or it's even going to get controversy. And so I think to the point about like, I really appreciate the conversations. I think that's like such a great first step. But I think even speaking of like actions, I think there's now more and more reasons why companies really now see the need to invest in it. And I appreciate that we as a society are trying to push for companies to do better via their bottom line.
Yeah, definitely. And companies has to be really conscious about the fact that they need to build products that represent their users, right? And for example, if you're building a health app that forgot about menstruation for one thing, because it was built by a group of engineers who are all men. Obviously that's wrong. Then that's why you need to have diversity and inclusivity in the team, because that way you get to consider a lot more things that you would normally if you're a homogeneous group.
Absolutely. I would not have a clue on how to contribute to that. So, I probably wouldn't make a great product for it. So it makes a ton of sense. We have been mentioning too about products and like companies and how they've been investing in it. What are you all seeing? Like, how are companies investing in it? Because I think I've seen it show up in different ways, and I'm curious how you all have seen companies starting to think about it more.
I guess one thing I've seen a lot of companies trying to address, ones that are doing it, I think, better than others, are trying to address it at a more structural issue. So they're, making sure that their hiring their processes don't have things like unconscious bias, and trying to do a lot more training of people that are going to be doing interviewing at the companies to say, like, here are things you shouldn't be doing, and here's ways to like make sure that you're interviewing fairly and that you're not making people aware of their unconscious bias so that it's not a part of that. So that's, I think, a really good thing that I see. Also, companies that are proactively doing things like, if women have been traditionally underleveled or underpromoted or underpaid, they proactively are going and doing analysis of their data in the company and saying, we're going to automatically re-level people or automatically adjust salaries just so that everybody's on a fair playing field. It sucks that it took a long time for companies to actually do that, but the fact that they are trying, I think, is really good. I think Salesforce did that in the last few years, like massively went through and just adjusted everybody to make sure salaries were fair. So things like that, I think, are really important.
I like that training part too, because now you're getting people to be more aware of it and think about those things, because how does a problem scale, right? Like, you can't just have like a lead diversity inclusion person for your company. I mean, that's a great start, but like the whole point of it is like, how do you really build this mindset across the company? And so that you're catching those things even in your own bias, or just being more aware of it. We all have biases, absolutely do. And so it's just starting to think a little more holistically of like, how does that show up?
Yeah. And to Jen's point earlier, just like actions over words, like don't write a blog post about how your company values diversity, do something about it through like these tangible things.
Yeah, definitely. And we know we cannot solve this or fix all of this in our lifetimes even, right? But at least something is being done, and as I said, yeah, that's really very important. And it's not just signaling, but really doing something, as you said, Stacey, tangible, which people and other companies might look up to and hopefully copy. Because for me, I always say this, that for this particular problem, education is the key, because we all, as we said, we all have these biases, and really it's just a matter of addressing it by educating ourselves and everyone around us. And yes, and companies have got a big, I think, responsibility here to not just do something for them internally, but really support the community who's doing something as well to address the problems. Because at the end of the day, there are a lot of individuals who are putting up all these projects for underrepresented people in technology, but they don't get the funding. Honestly, I know a lot of people that actually even spends their own money to get the programs going, when you have like billion trillion companies who have got the budget. And when you luckily we have some support for this particular conference, but there's been instances where people really have forked out their own money, and I kind of feel like that's not fair, because they're already giving their time, energy and effort to this, and companies, all you can do is like give them some budget to support the work that they're doing.
I also love that you brought up, Jen, the community aspect. Like the fact that we're at a conference, for tech and diversity is amazing. But I think about that even when for myself, or even pushing that towards like others in Netflix, is thinking about which conferences are we speaking at, or how are we investing, what are we sponsoring. And I think those are aspects which I find really important. I care a lot about the community, and so I want to make sure that I'm thinking strategically about like not showing up to a all white man panel, right? Like I want to make sure that I'm not adding to the problem. And I mean, I've totally made the mistake, and sometimes it wasn't like conscious or purposely. It just like I didn't put the effort into maybe dig in to say like, oh, what are your speaker lineup look like? Have you thought about diversity and inclusion? Like, how does that show up for you? And like, what do you think about that in the conference? And I think more and more we question these things, it starts getting others to think about it too. But like, it takes time. I'm not expecting everyone to do the 100% do the best job right away. Nor if they didn't think about it, it's like, that's fine. Hopefully we can have that conversation. I'm not going to shame someone for doing that, but I want to have the conversation about like how we could maybe make it better. And maybe I'm not the best panelist to be on. Maybe I can pull someone else from my team or colleagues across the company that have a different opinion, and would be better suited for a panel.
Yeah, I really like what you said, Ryan, about effort. Like all of this takes effort on every individual aspect. And I really like also going back to what Stacy was saying about the retention part just resonates with me so much of like, you can get so many people through the door, but if you can't get them to stay because it just feels so toxic, that's such a big problem. I have so many friends that have tried their best to stay in, managerial positions, like going from IC up to managerial positions, and tried their best, and then like just kind of like waved the white flag and left the tech industry. And to the point of retention, I think that like I love everything that's been covered, because I think the diversity part, that's from a company, that could come from up top of being like, we're just going to hire more diverse people. But the inclusion part, the retention part is very much, I love that you said again that it's structural, because it really is like I can be made to feel unsafe from just one individual on my team. And it's the responsibility of every single person, I mean, me included, everybody, to be very conscious of how we're making others on the team feel. And so I really like going back to that word effort. Like I think the biggest action is that like we need to put in the effort, every one of us, of like, even as someone that's like a woman of color, I feel like there's so many things like we mentioned earlier that I have ingrained bias in, and it's just that constant effort, I think is the most important to me personally.
Yeah, I think it's like it becomes like all of our responsibility too. Like surely if someone said something, inappropriate to you, and I catch that, like I could just say nothing and be like, well, it's not my problem. But that's like, that to me doesn't feel right either. Is like, why is that Shirley's responsibility to have to take on that burden all the time? Or, I think it's like for all of us to catch those things and just say something. And, and it's not to shame the other person either, because like we all make mistakes. Oh my goodness, I have made so many mistakes and I will continue to make mistakes. But I think like just being conscious and open, like, oh wow, hey Ryan, you probably shouldn't refer to that as X, Y, and Z, or, like that's probably not the best word to use here in this scenario. And me not knowing, I'm like, great, I now I know, and I'm sorry I said that, and just like owning that. So I think I look to others if I catch someone say something wrong or treat someone different, like I'm going to say something, and I hope that they're receptive to it and that we're all learning and in this together.
Actually, that's a really good point, because especially early on in my career, I didn't realize what what unsafe comments looked like, if that makes sense, of like what bias looked like of and this is a story that like I think Ryan, you tell sometimes, of the first time I was at React Rally, and I was giving a talk, and then suddenly somebody shouts from all the way like in the back and interrupts my talk, and just tells me to up the font size because he can't see. And then I think we like have a little bit of an exchange, and I move forward because in my mind, and then I just pick up the talk again, because in my mind I'm like, yeah, he just couldn't see, like, and like I didn't think too much about it. But Ryan and a few others afterwards was like, WTF, like that was completely unacceptable. And like, I think, did you call out that person on my behalf? I can't remember, but I think even just that moment of somebody else telling me, hey, that's unacceptable behavior that I didn't even think about, I think has made me more aware of all of the kind of little microaggressions that we encounter day to day. And I think that, really helps because it means that I'm more aware, and that means that I can be on the lookout for other people too.
Yeah. And that was a time where I was like, you also want to be conscious of like, when's the right time to say something? And in that scenario, do I want to add to the problem and interrupt your conversation? Like, draw attention to that, interrupt you're already been interrupted when you're speaking to now add to that. Stacy was actually sitting right beside me, and I was like, we were both appalled at it. In that scenario where I would best like take that approach is find the person, find this man after the fact, and just mention is like, hey, did you know you're aware that like that was probably not the best time to ask that? And I understand like you couldn't see that, but she was right in the middle of her presentation, and that can really throw someone off. And I think a lot of times, unfortunately, this does tend to happen more to females, that they'll be up there speaking and they're getting interrupted. It's less likely going to happen to me. And so like, it's just like, I'm a little more conscious of that for sure.
Yeah, and we all obviously come from a place where we know nothing, or we don't know a lot about this subjects that we're tackling right now, and it's fine, right? But recognizing that yes, you don't know much about this and you need to learn, is like a key thing. So accept that, and yeah, just be conscious that yes, in the beginning you'll be very uncomfortable with this thing. And I think someone said the other day when I was giving a talk, we all have to start being comfortable with being uncomfortable, because yeah, this is it's obviously not a very simple subject. It's a delicate thing, and we can all make mistakes as we actually try and correct the situation we're in. But yeah, I think we just have to be forgiving of everyone, right? Or as you said, Ryan, forgiving, or be cognizant of things that need to be addressed, and maybe try and find like ways to address them without having to kill each other.
Yeah, because you don't want it to be like this
yourself.
huge frustration thing that we're fighting about. It's like we're trying to make things more of inclusive at that point. And I think of like another thing, I know we were talking about different tech companies or companies in general, like things that they're doing. One thing I've been impressed with, and I know Stacy Lassian has done a lot of this too, is working on inclusive in language within the company. And like the cool thing is you don't have to necessarily have people catching people. Meaning is like, it doesn't mean I don't have to be the police saying like, oh, you shouldn't use that word because of X, Y, and Z. You can actually have things like Slack bots that catch a word and they're like, oh, maybe you should try a different word. And so it's like educating without having that. Or in pull requests, like, which we're coding and some things might get said poorly, and it's like a pull request, something could be caught there, and letting the person know. I'm really a big fan of the effort that a lot of companies and just even the open source community has done to get rid of the Git master branch. Like we're moving towards, we've all kind of decided main is the better name for that. And it's not it's not an easy thing in companies to just drastically change. So that it sounds simple, just changing a name, but it's a big effort. And I love that companies are investing that and just trying to be more inclusive that way. It's like, oh, we made mistakes in the past. Cool. Let's try and fix that and go forward in a better scenario.
Yeah, that's why I didn't like understand. I know some companies were opposed to doing that very thing. When I was thinking, it's like a very simple change, like really, really simple change. Like, and the effect of that is so so great, so good. Why won't you do it? I just don't understand it.
Yeah, exactly. Like language just matters so much, and words matter more than people, I think, give them credit, and it creates an atmosphere. The way that you talk about something creates an atmosphere that is part of a culture, and that is part of what creates culture is language. And and just choosing to use a different word or a different phrase is not that difficult, but sometimes, maybe you've said a word all your life, and it's sort of like it's the default that you go to, like saying, "Hey guys," when you're talking to a group that is not just all men. Like, that seems like a simple change. Although if it's the thing you've said your whole life, like, you just have to catch yourself but you can learn. Our brains are elastic; they can change. You can with practice, you can change any of that.
I think it gets back to my point, is it does take time. I love that example, Stacey, because you catch yourself and you're like, oh no, like, it's fine. It's like, nobody's going to be like, wow, you messed up big time. But it's like, as long as you're being a little more conscious of it and trying to change that, I think is amazing. And I know, Stacey, like, you and I've had these conversations years ago where there was something, I remember it was something like, hey guys, it was something else, but you're like, oh, that's probably not the best word. And it's stuck in my head. And now whatever, I guess it hasn't stuck in my head in the fact that I can't remember what word it was, but it's like, it's something that now I've trained myself, like, just to not say anymore, just being more aware and more conscious of that. And I think that that's amazing. It was just, even as a peer, you saying like, oh, it's probably not the best word. And I'm like, oh, wow, never even thought of that. Now it's like, I'm thinking about that more and being more conscious.
And even we women, like, we use guys, right? In the past, all the time. And I'm the same. And I had to really, like, learn to change it. And now I, replace it with folks. Most of the time, I sometimes forget, but I know at least I know I made an effort. It was very, very, again, uncomfortable at first, because I'm not used to, like, folks. Like, it wasn't like a common thing. I don't know if if in the US is a more common word to refer to a group, but I think in the UK it's not really much of a word. Guys is still the thing that most people use. But it was very uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, it's like what we say about confidence is a muscle that you can exercise. This is also another, like, muscle that you can exercise. So go do it.
No.
I love what you brought up too, Jen, a bit, is the, like, different countries, different, like, where you live, things can drastically change too. And so, something that you're like, wow, we don't even really say that. And that's fine. That's great. But there's, I think there might be something else that someone else is offended by. And you may not even realize that. And I think that that's really something just to be conscious of. I think it's not about, like, saying the right thing all the time, but just being more aware, like, hey, if this person was offended, I'm happy to change. Like, they are words, like, they're powerful, like Stacey said, but it's also like, we have so many different words in the English language that we can switch it up and do still say what we're trying to say. And I think that to me is what's really impressive about that.
And what I found as well, when I started changing, my use of, like, guys versus folks, is that people who actually hear me, or people I, like, email or whatever, or chat to, kind of feel uncomfortable with that as well, because they're not used to hearing that. But my view is, what, I'll just stay with it, because otherwise, things are not going to change if no one starts it. So so just, if you're doing it, then just stick with it, and hopefully more people will get influenced by it.
You know what? It's even like doing pronouns, which now I regret we didn't start off doing that. But, like, saying your pronouns, like he, his, or her, she, like, think that is awesome. Like, it's just now making it more, like, more normal. It feels awkward at first. I will admit, the first time I ever did it, it just felt weird. And it's like, that's okay. Like, we should feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. And it will get less uncomfortable as we go.
Yeah, definitely.
So earlier we'd kind of talked about, like, if you saw something, should you say something, or how do you approach that, and how can you basically be an ally? And I'm curious some of your thoughts on, like, what are ways in which people have maybe shown up as an ally, or where you would like to see them show up as allies. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that.
I think some of the best things I've seen with allyship is because if you're part of the more represented group, you have more, I guess, power in that the burden shouldn't necessarily be on the person in the smaller represented group to do something about things. That's quite a burden. And so to be a good ally is to, if you see somebody say something in a meeting that isn't inclusive, or talk over somebody, or just to have behavior that makes people feel uncomfortable, if you can call that out or say something, that's huge. That's I think really great, because it starts to set an example and others will start to follow. And amplify voices. Like if somebody, if I'm talking in a meeting and I say something and then it's ignored or talked over, someone could be like, hey, actually, I think, Stacey's idea was really interesting. Why don't we dig into that further? Like that's helpful, because sometimes the this sort of unconscious bias stuff comes in, and it's like, maybe my idea wasn't listened to, not necessarily because I said it, but because unconscious bias. And so if you amplify it, that helps to start to erase it. And so things like that, I think, are really good for allyship.
Or when someone else takes your idea and raise it.
Oh.
It's like, the idea that Stacey just shared. That's a good idea. Sorry, Shirley, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say, I actually really love how Stacey put it as the more represented group, or even a person that has more quote unquote power in the organization, because I don't think that. If we're talking about inclusivity, like I don't think it's just purely like race or gender or sexual orientation or anything like that. I think even like I think there are points at which maybe like people would like, maybe I would be the most listened to person in the room, and then like I want to make sure that like other people, even like as a woman of color, maybe like I'm just like an expert on the topic or something, and then and then I can try my best to make the space more welcoming or highlight other people. So I guess all I'm trying to say is like I really like what Stacey was saying, that made me think of like ally as not just, like one particular group of people, but like we all can be an ally for someone else that might be stuck in a more difficult situation, or like they don't feel like they can speak up as much. But I would like to kind of like echo the whole, I think when, let's say like if I'm in a position where I feel attacked or trolled or whatever, it's oftentimes that if I speak up, I sound defensive, and then it like lights up the fire. And to have someone else that's like in my corner, like supporting me, backing me up, that's some of the most like powerful feeling, like empowering feeling. And I love that, because like in my studio with my studio mates, we have this pact of like we'll always be in each other's corner of like if we get online trolls or something. And I think that is really helpful to know that like at any given time I have friends, or I have people in my corner.
I like that. That is awesome. And I think Shirley, I like what you said too, is like having the people in your corner, or even that it doesn't matter about race or gender, or like that may not even be the group that's like maybe being spoken like negatively to, or whatever it is. But even people of power could be literally someone in a higher up position, right?
Yeah.
Like we're in companies where you have a director, VP, manager, and hopefully they are using that clout, because they do have clout. Don't get it wrong, they do. And so like, how are they leveraging that for good? It can go a long way.
Yeah, we kind of covered that under the subject of having a sponsor. So we know about mentors, but sponsors really are people who has your back, and would defend you or whatever, or give you like better directions in terms of how you deal with things. Or it might not even be like a sponsor, like a senior person. For example, if you're a guy who's for example, getting this particular whatever package, right, from a company, and you knew about a woman who's applying for the same role,
Mm,
maybe in your company or in a different company, and if you maybe kind of help the person realize that this is, like the market rate, if they're, because we know,
mhm,
right, that women in general are underpaid compared to men. So,
mhm,
if you kind of just simply, helping that person realize that this is probably the package you should be like asking for, and it's a
mhm,
big help. That is allyship, right? In simple terms.
mm,
Because you're, definitely helping that person, that woman in particular, not get the short end of the stick. I actually mentioned this in another chat earlier, but basically that's
mhm,
another form of allyship.
I love that one
Go on
too,
to
because
you.
it is
Yeah.
like knowing your worth is huge. Like, I think
mm,
that that's the most important thing, is understanding what, getting paid, what's the value, like what's the market rate, and like what are my peers getting paid, especially when we've seen underrepresented groups getting paid less, and it's just like, it's disheartening. They're doing the
Mm.
same job, probably even doing a better job, but yeah, still they're getting paid less.
mhm,
um, One thing I wanted to ask you all too is, being an ally, like we talked about, like someone speaking up so that, you don't have to necessarily be like, the underrepresented group may not have to be the one that constantly is taking on that burden. I think there are times though, in situations like, even Shirley, you mentioned the conference one, where I could have stood up and like shame the guy in front of everyone. Probably wouldn't have been a good thing, but I think it's like, when is the right time? Because this often goes through my head too, is you could also make the mistake of too much attention to it, and that could actually be a problem too. And so I think there are ways where you might even ask, like, if Stacy, I saw something egregious where I'm like, do you want me to say
mhm,
something? Maybe it's like through Slack,
yeah,
or I could message her off the side, or ask, how would you have liked me to handle that in the future? Because I think that's important too, because you don't want to just be, especially me
mhm,
being a white man, I just want to come in and be like, oh, I'm going to save the world. It's, and say, because like that can actually add to the
yeah,
problem. So I think
Yeah.
it's important. I guess my point here is to also ask like your colleagues, how would you like me to handle this situation? Or
mhm,
maybe it's like saying it to the person who made the mistake, just saying it behind the scenes, pulling them aside, message them in Slack, whatever it is. I think that can go a long way too.
yeah. That's a really good point, because I feel like there's a very fine line between allyship and savior, like the savior,
Yes.
Savior mentality.
the savior mentality. Yeah. Um, So yeah, I think definitely the asking the person, so that they can be in charge of how they want the conflict resolved, or
Yeah. I know we're getting close to time. I'm curious, as maybe as we're wrapping up the conversation, what's a piece of advice that you all would give, just to help our community, our companies, teammates, anything to really help be more inclusive? Like, what's something that you think we've talked a lot about allyship, but I would love to hear a piece of advice that you would love to leave our listeners with.
I think for me, it's, I guess, a long time ago when I was in college, I did this thing called diversity training or whatever, and this was like um, in the late '90s. So it was kind of interesting that we talk a lot about it now, but back then I think it wasn't um, as talked about at all, like at companies and tech and stuff. So it was an interesting program that I did. And you'd go into dorm rooms and you'd have people um, get together and talk about these topics. And one of the exercises we did was, and I think they still do them today. It's like you ask someone, when you were growing up, were you able to go to a library, or were you able to, did your parents take you to go swimming? Or there's all these like things that you can ask, and you say, take a step forward if you did. And it shows, it visually shows at the end of this exercise what kind of privilege you've had growing up. And I thought it was a really powerful exercise to get people to understand what privilege is. And so I guess my advice would be, like, if you've never thought about privilege or what it is, and what that means for you, take some time to think about that. And I think that helps you become more empathetic and realize how you can either become a better ally or how you can do things differently.
Love that.
So for me, again, I'd like to to stress that it has to be a continuous education for everyone, because that's the only way I think we can change, or at least one of the best ways we can change ourselves and the environment, and change it for people who are not being included. And yes, again, concrete actions, especially from companies. Please do, don't just do signaling and just making or doing things so that you look good. There is definitely a need, for supporting people who are working, in getting, getting more changes out there in terms of diversity and inclusion. You have resources, so please, do do use those resources. And I particularly had an experience with this actually a few years ago, because I started this conference back in 2017, and there was a year when it was really difficult because paying for like physical stuff. Like the last conference we had to feed like 1,800 women because we don't charge for for tickets for this conference, whether it's in person or virtual. And I'm not gonna mention the company name, but I so I approached them for sponsorship, um, and I think the answer I got was they're more focused on like making sure that their programs, um, are the ones that are kind of highlighted. They're not necessarily focused on diversity. They didn't say that exactly, but then, this is really funny because so I got a no for that, and which is fine. You won't always get a yes, but the next day they announced their. I'm not gonna mention the figure because it might reveal who they are, but they're a something something billion or something trillion company, and I said, oh my god, I'm asking for a little bit of your resources, so you can even give it to me. Anyway, so yeah, I just really wish the companies would be more supportive of community efforts.
Yeah. Wow. I yes, I 100% agree. Oh my gosh. What I was going to say was just on the individual level of, I think to what Jen has said, to what Stacey has said, to what everybody has said about all of these conversations or all of these changes being very uncomfortable. From the very beginning, I've definitely gotten feedback about, languages that weren't, that, didn't feel inclusive, or just being educated about, things that, and all of them have always felt not only uncomfortable, but like even with the best intention of the other person, I felt defensive. And so, and it's I don't have to be defensive. They're like being so nice about it, but like it's just kind of like it feels like I'm my person is being attacked. And I think it's that like to let go of that. Like I'm still on the journey of like being better at taking feedback and just being open to listening to what the other person is trying to say, especially if the person is in that group that is the underrepresented group, or they are, the group that was wronged. They're taking the time to explain it to me. So like being open to it and putting aside my own personal pride, because that's what's like making me defensive, and just being like, let's listen to like what's the important part of, they're just trying to make a better, like they're trying to make our relationship better, like our friendship better, or and so to focus on that and be and just be open to the listening without being defensive. That was my one thing.
I love it. I'm probably just adding to some of these things, but I think for me, it's like getting comfortable being vulnerable too, is because like we are going to make mistakes and we do have to have these hard conversations. You're gonna fumble along. Like it's gonna happen. You're gonna say the wrong thing. Try and get comfortable with that and just be vulnerable. And like Shirley, you said, take the feedback, let it sit and understand it, and just be like, okay, I made a mistake and how do I move forward? But for me too, it's like self-reflection. I think like hearing Stacey talk about like what's my privileges, or thinking through those things and how do they show up. And yeah, definitely I've had a lot of privileges. So I'm trying to think like, how does that show up differently for others? And so I think that's really good. There's so many resources online. I think like you have to be reading. And I mean, not just online, there's amazing books out there, videos, everything, articles. And I think for me, I've constantly had to read all these things to be more empathetic. Like, I mean, here I am, like, you know, I'm like, look around, everyone's like me. I'm a man in tech. Like, that is, you know, typically that's who I look like, my colleagues all look alike. And so being the only is not something that I experience often. And so for me, I have to like over index on understanding and just learning from peers or doing a lot of research on my own. Because yes, I don't also want to go, so teach me all the things, like, you know, I don't know what it's like. It's like, no, I mean, do that search myself. There's a lot of great materials out there. So for me, self-reflect, look, educate. There's so much material. I think that will continue to help us get better. It takes time. We're all in this journey at different points too. You might be at ground zero, just realizing that I should do better. And that's great. I mean, people are further along. Others haven't even thought about it. And so I think that's okay. We're going to be all at it in different points.
And one thing I want to say to people who are making an effort is sometimes people won't even believe you. People will probably think, oh, what's, you know, his or her agenda and all that. And you know what, if from the bottom of your heart, you know, you're doing something genuine, just, you know, just continue with it. Don't listen to criticisms. Well,
Yeah.
obviously we all have to listen to criticisms, you know, especially if they're the constructive ones, right? But you know what I mean? But like, don't get discouraged. If you think you're, you know, trying to do something good, then yeah, just continue with it. And and eventually you get, you know, more support from people around you.
Yeah, don't do it for credit either, because like that's like you said, is like you're going to hear from trolls and that kind of stuff. That criticism you can ignore, or I mean, it's hard sometimes, but ignore that. But you're also you don't have to get credit for this. This is all the like little things that just go a long way and help the community and help everyone be more inclusive. Well, this is awesome discussion. Like, thank you all. I know, like we said, not an easy subject to talk about. It is uncomfortable, and like even being on a panel where, you know, people are going to be watching us and listening to us, it's like, yeah, well, we could have said the wrong thing. We may even have said the wrong thing. But I think it takes a lot of courage from everyone. So thank you all for having this conversation. I hope to see more people having this conversation.
No, thanks to all three of you for being here at Techno Day, and yeah, we'd love to have, you know, more conversations like this in the future.
Awesome. Thanks for all you do, Jen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen.
having
this
us.
is amazing. Yes, thank you.